Hi and welcome to part 2 of my series on how to optimise your chain for racing. If you haven't watched the first video, I'll put a link to it up here. I'd recommend watching it because it kind of explains my thinking behind what I was doing with this video. I wrote a blog post 4 years ago and a lot has changed since I did that, and I'd started to look more into independent sources to try and find good information to back up my ideas to show you in these videos, because of course with things like chain lube and with waxing chains and with cleaning chains, there's a great deal of bro sites, there's a great deal of old wives' tales, and also manufacturers kind of misdirection, showing you kind of things that maybe aren't relevant, or with slightly interesting test protocols that may not actually be relevant or realistic to the sorts of things that we're doing. So just to quickly recap, I've pretty much gone to 3 sources on this that I believe we can trust. Jason Smith used to run a company called Friction Facts, which were an independent chain and lube and bearing tester, and they were bought out by Ceramic Speed. Everything that I base this on is based on Jason Smith's old research that he did before he was bought out by Ceramic Speed. The next person I've gone to is a guy called Josh Poertener. If you haven't come across him, he runs a company called Silka, which of course indicates a little bit of bias, but if you look at who he's worked with in terms of world records and Olympic medals and in terms of world tour teams, you'll see that this guy is hugely respected in the industry. The third person is completely independent. His name's Kerin, and he owns a company called Zero Friction, which tests chain longevity, which of course isn't exactly what we're looking for with time trialing, because we're looking for fast products rather than necessarily long-term products, but of course the two do go hand in hand. Now this is part 2 of the series, and this is where we're going to look at cleaning and then waxing your chain. But as Kerin suggests, it's a good idea to try and think of the cleaning stage as 2 stages. One is cleaning, and the second part is removing all of the film so that we get a clean metal surface to be able to then wax our chains. And then finally, before we get stuck into the process, I'd just like to encourage you to try not to think of this as being complex. I know that we're used to kind of using chain reservoirs and washing our chain through those chain reservoirs and then putting wet lube on, because it's actually pretty easy. Using a chain reservoir to clean a chain effectively would probably take you about 50 recycles of clean degreaser to get that chain anywhere near clean. And as we see from some of the research that I'm going to talk about in the third part, whilst wet lube might be convenient, it's not necessarily the best thing we can use. Whilst it might seem laborious, actually cleaning your chain in this method and then waxing it will save a huge amount of time and will save a lot of money, not just in terms of materials, but also in terms of chain cassette and chain ring wear. And in fact, if you do go down the waxing route, what I'm about to show you only needs to be done once. After that, all you then need to do is to clean the chain if it's dirty, being that we're in the UK and it's got wet and it's got grime in it, you just need to put it into boiling water and then you can just simply re-wax it. If you're lucky enough to live in a country that's nice and dry, then you just need to stick it in the re-waxing pot and you'll be away. As ever, I'll put more information in the description below, along with a load of links to research and the websites that are relevant. So first off, what are we going to need to carry out this process? Well, here's my suggestion. You're going to need 2 plastic tubs or jars, something with a lid that you can kind of give a really good shake and a vigorous clean with. You're going to need some methylated spirit, which is what we call it in the UK. I believe it's called denatured alcohol in other countries. You're going to need some white spirit, which is also known as mineral spirits in other countries. You're going to need a set of clean lint-free cloths. You're going to need a hairdryer, and if you're me and you want to go for the optimal chain, you want to go for an ultrasonic cleaner as well. Links to some of these items and some of the products are going to be below. They're not affiliate links. I'm not clever enough to work out how to do that. And then obviously you're going to need a chain. Now I'm going to use a brand new chain, and I'll explain the issues with using a brand new chain in a minute, but that's going to become my race chain for next year. My race chain from last season is going to become my training chain, and I've already waxed and prepared that one. The process is slightly different if you're using a brand new chain than if you're using an old chain, and I'll explain that as we go through the process. You're also going to need some quick links, and I use the YBN ones because they're good for 4 or 5 uses, whereas some of the other products you should only use once or twice. Okay, so let's take a look at the actual process of, first of all, cleaning your chain. So I'm using a new chain here, as I say, and the problem with that is it comes with a factory substance on it that isn't actually designed as a lubricant. What it's designed to do is to enable the company to store that and for it not to go rusty or for it to get contaminants on. Now, it's not actually a very good lubricant, and in fact it will pick up decontaminants if you were to use this out on the road, and will increase a huge amount of chain wear. It's incredibly resilient stuff, and it's going to take a huge amount of effort to get this off, but it's worth it. So I've already run the chain in for an hour on my turbo on my old bike, and now I've taken it off, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a soak in some white spirit in one of these tubs. Now I'm going to give it a shake for 2 minutes really vigorously, and then I'm going to leave it overnight. next day when I come back to it, I'm going to put that white spirit in a container, which I'm going to take to the recycling centre along with the methylated spirit that I'm going to use as well. I give it a good clean with a cloth, and then I pop it back in a dried out container, and I do the same step again. Ideally, again, leaving this overnight or at least a few hours. And then I do the same step again. So actually I do this whole cycle 3 times. Now, it may take you 2 days to do this, or it may take you 3. It's up to you, but the longer you leave it to soak, the better. Essentially, what we want to do is get it to the point that when we run it through the cloth, it doesn't leave any marks or residue. It's at this stage that I will also put it through the ultrasonic cleaner for 10 minutes in some white spirit, just to kind of make sure I've got right into all of those rollers. You don't have to do this stage if you don't want to and you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, but for me it's the best way to make sure I've got the absolute best clean I possibly can. If you're using an old chain, the process is actually a little bit quicker in terms of how quickly you can recycle the white spirit through, but you may need to do this between 7 and 12 times to make sure that cloth comes out clean. You may not actually have to leave it overnight. It might be worth it, but ultimately, whichever route you take with a brand new chain or an old chain, you keep recycling through that white spirit, changing the white spirit each time until your cloth comes out clean. It's at that point, if you have an ultrasonic cleaner, that you then use the ultrasonic cleaner to give it that final deep clean in white spirit. And then once you've done that and you've got a clean dry chain, you then pop it in a bath of methylated spirit. You then just agitate it in this tub for around about 2 minutes. And basically what this does is it cuts through the white spirit film and gets right down to the metal. It's got a high level of ethanol in the methylated spirit that gets right the way down to the metal. That means that when we wax the chain, it's going to get right onto the metal rather than being a separating film of white spirit between the metal and the wax that we're trying to get onto the chain. This is an important step, and sometimes people skip this or they try and use soap and water, but that adds an extra layer of film in itself. Methylated spirit is the way to go to get it right down to the bare bones. Give it a good clean once it comes out of the methylated spirit. Don't forget to recycle that properly as well. Once you've run it through with a cloth to make sure that's completely dry and you've disposed of the methylated spirits properly once again, you then use a hairdryer for 5 minutes just to dry it off, or in my case, I've got a cheap heat gun that goes down to an extremely low setting that I'm using here. I wouldn't suggest using a heat gun on anything as a high setting because, of course, don't forget, methylated spirit is highly flammable. So just be really careful when you're doing this step and make sure it doesn't get too hot. Once you've done that, you've got yourself a clean, dry, but more importantly, down to the metal chain ready for waxing. So in the case of waxing, I've got a blend that I made up about 4 or 5 years ago, which is pretty much the same as the molten speed wax. I pop that in a slow cooker, or what some people call a crock pot. I think I picked one off of Amazon for about 15 quid. It's a Breville one actually, it's pretty good quality for 15 quid. And I let that get to the point where it's runny like fluid and not solid in any way. But I do that on a low setting so as not to overheat the wax. I then thread the chain onto a piece of metal so that I can swish that around inside the wax. And then I pop the chain and the quick link that's completely clean into the wax, and I leave it in there for about an hour, occasionally just swishing it around a little bit. Once I'm completely happy that the wax has got into every nook and cranny by swishing it around from time to time, I take it out, being really careful because it's going to be super hot and wearing gloves to make sure that I don't burn myself. And then I hang that out to let the wax drip into a tray underneath. Make sure that doesn't go onto the floor because it can stain the floor quite badly and you don't want to get into trouble for doing something like that, right? Things are tough enough anyway with this racing malarkey. Once we've got into this position, the chain's ready to install, which is what I'm going to continue on in the next video. We just need to break those links to make sure the wax is kind of flaked off a little bit. Then we've got our ready to race fast wax chain. If waxing isn't for you, then you do all of those stages up until the end point and then you just put the lube on it. But don't forget, as I said to you before previously, this is going to pick up more decontaminants and you will have to go through this process more often. If you use the wax, this is the first and last time you'll have to go through all these stages. In the future, you can use hot water to rinse off all of the dirt and grime from the road, or you can just stick it straight back in the wax if you've had pretty clean races. And to me, that's a pretty simple way of living, if I'm honest. It shouldn't take too long to do these things. A couple of days at the beginning of each season, and then maybe a couple of hours, you know, every 200-300 kilometers to make sure that chain is at absolute optimum condition. The next video is going to be about installing the chain and also optimizing all the other elements of your drive chain. If you don't want to miss that video, hit the subscribe button here. Here's a link to some other videos I've made about time trialing, including the first of this series. Don't forget to hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next one.